know he's likely to have thoughts on the CAFR backwards at the end. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's get going then. Call this meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority for Thursday, December 6, 2018 order. Now, we now have a quorum present. It's 8:42 a.m. And I'd like to ask whether there's anybody in the public this morning that would have any public comment, any item which is not on today's agenda. Is there any public comment today? Welcome, Newell. Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next up is our consent calendar. That's a motion to approve. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
Good morning, Chair and APC committee members. Before you this morning, you have both a draft federal legislative platform and a draft state legislative platform. We're going to take them a little out of order than the way they were in your packet. We're going to start with the federal side of the House. And just a reminder that both of these documents are intended to be guiding documents for both our state and federal advocates to kind of give them a sense or a lens with which to view all of the legislative proposals that they're reviewing every day on CCTA's behalf. Any particular positions on bills will come back to the APC committee and the board to take as a whole. So this is not kind of a general blanket yes on any of these items or a no. It's just simply a way to help focus and sharpen the efforts of our advocates so they're working more efficiently on our behalf. So I'll start briefly with the federal platform, and then Mr. Watts is here, and he's going to talk you through some items of interest on the state side of the House and the state platform. The draft federal legislative platform before you is very similar to the platform that we had adopted in 2019. And as you'll notice, I'm not going to go through every item on here. It's focused very heavily on cutting as much money as we can for our projects and our programs and the innovative ideas that we want to put into practice, and also on streamlining regulations. As we look ahead towards a new Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, now is the time to start laying the groundwork for that. I think the many years that CCTA board members and staff have been traveling to Washington, D.C., meeting with members of different committees, and being sure that the Contra Costa delegation knows our priorities. This is the time when that really bears fruit in terms of what's get put in these different packages. One item of note that I wanted to point out that has to do with appropriations is in the last appropriations bill, there was $100 million set aside for kind of advanced technologies, $60 million for cities and counties to put innovative solutions to use in their communities. And of that $60 million, $20 million was specifically set aside for automated proving grounds like Momentum Station. So we had our own pot of money that we could compete for. And in the time since that bill was passed, USDOT has actually undesignated the 10 DOT proving grounds. So they no longer have official DOT proving grounds in the United States anymore. And that means that that pot of money that was set aside for the proving grounds to compete for now kind of goes back into the general pot, and we have to compete for those dollars against anyone else in the country. And I think that we have a really great program, and I think that we have a good chance of competing very well for those dollars. But I think that that's something looking forward. We're really going to keep our eye on how we can potentially make sure there are pots of money for the ideas and the programs that we want to do that we compete best for. So with that, I just wanted to say again that, this is fairly general language, and it's intended to be so because we will be bringing back specific items to this body for approval on the federal side of the House. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark Watts to do the state side, and then we can answer questions about either one at the end, or if anyone has any questions in particular.
Why don't we take questions now on the federal
Okay.
Proposed program? Any questions? Bill?
Just a comment. Thanks, Lindsay. And I know this is sort of a global issue, but, in South County, there is Tri-Valley Transportation Commission, which is made up of the 5 cities, Danville, San Ramon, Dublin, Livermore, Pleasanton. The top priority in that area is the relieving congestion 580 to 680, and ultimately most of that traffic is, from our perspective, is coming onto 680. Their number one priority project is the Valley Link, they're calling it now, which is to connect, since BART is not going to go, it's sort of like our E-BART connection between Central Valley, using the old railway easement. They have some $700 million. They need another $700 million. It was, up until the recent change in Congress, one of the number one priorities to get funding for that. The reality is no money at the federal level. I mean, as much as we think there's money, there's no money. They have a $2 trillion hole in the budget now. And that's the latest estimate by the current administration. So, but nonetheless, there's going to be a change. Jeff Denham is no longer in Congress, and he was head of rail. It was his number one project. So anything I think we can do, because ultimately it'll help us here in Contra Costa County, because two of our cities in there, we got a lot of money set aside to do a project. It's probably, there is a way maybe to do a $1.1 million, so maybe we're $400 million short. I would just hope that we might keep on our legislative anything we see that we can help support in that, because we can't pave our way out, even with a bus on shoulders, which was on the news this morning, by the way, Randy, on KCBS, and estimating that's years away to happen. This probably has a higher priority to happen in some form faster, probably as fast as what we did E-BART. So just maybe for consideration that we keep an eye on it, and if we can find a way, since we do provide funding for, the Contra Costa portion, if we can keep that in mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Randy.
Commissioners, so one of the issues is money. The other is speeding up the project delivery process so we get the product in the hands of the user faster. So that's also part of the federal platform, and Tim is heavily involved in this notion of we have to do 2 environmental documents in order to qualify for state and federal funding. And so why in California do we have to do 2 environmental documents instead of just one? Let's make CEQA the document, and then we'll commit to doing any federal studies, which is part of NEPA. And I think we're getting closer, at least to the framework that we can present to now the House, and hopefully the House of Representatives, hopefully they'll take that into see if they can get some regulation reform in this administration.
Bob?
I have a question, and Newell will help me out. So we have 2 cities that are kind of involved in this request, correct? And the other part of that action, how are they, we would ask for our part, how do they line up?
They have the $700 million.
Oh, they have the $700 million.
Yeah, it's not us. So there's really
So
no money.
are they willing to share?
Yeah, in that, building that, since BART bailed on the extension, as BART did out here, I think, again, it's just like the link coming out to Brentwood, it's the link going out there. 680 is, from an equity point of view, is now one of our top priority projects. This actually been one of the best things we can do to help 680, because we can get those cars off. We'll actually get those people on the BART from the Central Valley, get them to stop coming over 580. So all I'm saying is just on the legislative, as we see, not funding commitment, that as we see the opportunity to add support, MTC supports this as one of their top priority projects now, is that I think we should, because there's 2 cities that of our constituency here that are part of that, just to support it. I don't see us doing funding towards it, and there's never been a request for that, but just really the support to be a regional transportation. And Martin and all of us have had, we have a lot of interaction with that entity. So it's kind of like a mini SWAT, but it's just a
Micro mini SWAT.
There you go.
Mini SWAT.
I like that.
There we go. Any other question or comments? I have one question for you, Newell, and that is there some way in which you think we need to modify the draft 2019 federal legislative advocacy platform
I just
to
think
pick
if we
this point up?
Yeah, if we just put a line item
specifically?
in there, if it's okay, and make sure the board's comfortable. But I think what Randy said is the other thing, is if we can get one CEQA document, wow. I mean, that's true of all of our projects, but for a project like that, they'd cut a couple of years off of the timeline. It might happen in our lifetime, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or directions from the committee on the federal side? All right, thank you. Do you think you have sufficient direction?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
Let's go back then, I guess, to the state side.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Mark Watts here to discuss your platform. Before I do that, I just want to touch on a couple things, kind of set the stage of what's going on in Sacramento. As you all know, I'm sure, because you follow the political winds carefully, in the legislature, the Assembly now has a dominant Democrat majority of 60 to 20. And in the Senate, it's 29 to 11. Operationally, it probably doesn't affect a lot because they were either at or close to the supermajorities for votes. But it does tend to make it difficult for the organization of the House because you have a lot of members vying for chairmanships and leadership jobs. So that jockeying is going on right now. We'll have a better idea of how some of that turns out in January. On the governor's side, he's appointed a series of what he calls ambassadors, who are folks that he's drawing on to interact with. With a news leak yesterday, we found out that a fellow by the name of Anthony Williams is going to be designated the legislative secretary. He's worked for 4 different Democratic pro tems over the years, so he's a well-known fixture in Sacramento. And finally, I would just note that the Contra Costa delegation has 2 new members, Assemblymember Wicks and, I believe I pronounced it correctly, Assemblymember Bauer-Kagan. Yeah, Khan. Okay, I'm sorry. There's an extra A in there, so I didn't know how to address that. Moving on, the packet has your scorecard for how we looked at how we succeeded or fared last year or the last session. And there were I'll just touch on this comment. There were 2 very notable successes that you participated in, and that was the approval of Prop 69 in June and the defeat of Prop 6 in November. There's a number of other things in there that we monitored and watched carefully, but those are the 2 I would highlight. Moving on for the legislative program proposal for 2019, there's several items I just want to highlight for you, and I'd be glad to take questions on anything I don't cover or that I do highlight. First of all, we're going to be monitoring the SB1 implementation. It's off to a good start, but as you may recall, last year there was legislation that would have potentially affected local streets and roads funding based on housing production. So we're going to watch out for those kinds of changes to the structure of SB1. Now, Prop 69 protected the money for the purposes, but it didn't protect the program. So it's going to be our job to monitor that. In addition, we're proposing, or staff is recommending to you that the authorities seek legislation to extend the statutory deadline for the tax provisions under the Bonilla bill, AB 1665, extend the sunset. I have draft language in hand, and I'm starting the briefing session based on the outcome of today, whether you accept this or not, the briefing sessions with legislative staff this afternoon, frankly. Another proposal that the staff is recommending is the lowering of the supermajority for local and regional taxes. There is already 1 bill introduced, ACA 1 by Assemblymember Aguirre Curry, the chair of local government. It does deal with local special taxes in addition to bonded indebtedness vote rates. And so we're going to have to scrub it very, very carefully, make sure it doesn't have any issues in it before the bill's heard. So we'll be monitoring that. And another very important development that occurred toward the end of the legislative session, but outside the legislative arena, was the Supreme Court holding on Wayfair, which was it deals with internet sales and where the sales tax is collected. This is going to be very important for every one of the sales tax counties in the state. And there is a working group being formed by the self-help counties, and I understand that Lindsay is going to be very deeply involved in that. So you've got good coverage there, and I've been monitoring it with the tax committees on the outside. So we have our arms around this issue for now. And the final point I would just highlight is the regional distribution of state transit assistance funding. Your region is treated differently than the Southern California region. In Southern California, the individual county transportation commissions, which are akin to your organization, receive the funding directly and then allocate it to the transit agencies within their jurisdiction. Here, it all goes to MTC, and they sweep some off the top, and then the rest goes out to the transit agencies in your region. So the recommendation is to collaborate with the local transit agencies and others in trying to develop a new allocation approach. And on a final note on this item, the state transportation, the California Transit Association has been tasked by the two chairs of the Assembly and Senate Transportation Committee to take a new look at the Transportation Development Act and STA programs from an efficiency perspective and a fairness perspective. So that may be a good place to raise this item. So with that, I would bring my presentation to a close and await your questions.
Any questions for Mark? Comments or questions? Yeah, Newell?
No, well, I think it's great. I mean, it's going to be a challenging year because we're going to be overwhelmed by the legislature by housing-related. Everything is going to be related to housing. Every dollar we get, whether it be transportation, is going to be tied to some housing achievement. I would just like to suggest that, as you mentioned, we do have a new, two, but particularly for the core area here, we have two new assembly members. We had to find the opportunity to invite them. In Rebecca Bauer-Kahn's case, like her predecessor, no background in government, no local service. They were both attorneys, both work for nonprofits. Transportation, probably on her page, is like the ordinary citizen. I can't get where I'm going. I think we need to try to bridge some gaps there, meet with them and tell them about what we do, who we are, how it works, and what our needs are. And I think, Randy and maybe our chairs or something would be great folks to meet and maybe get both Wicks and Kahn in at the same time. I think it would be good to know.
Okay. Any particular suggested changes or modifications to the stateside platform or scorecard? Okay. Can you explain for my benefit what the Wayfair Supreme Court decision was about?
It's almost above my pay grade. It is about the treatment of the location of where the sales tax ought to be collected. Is it based on situs or is it based on sales? And it was premised, it's South Dakota or Wayfair versus South Dakota, Wayfair being an internet, big internet seller, but it holds across the country. There are some state laws in California that anticipated that will likely ensure that at least at a basic level, California will not lose out, but then it becomes an issue of which counties, depending upon situs and location issues, which counties will receive the benefit of the actual tax location, and therefore the revenues.
And this is a U.S. Supreme Court decision.
Yes, it is.
And yet it's getting into individual state county type
It does, because it'll change. It could have the effect of changing the location for where the sales tax is collected, and therefore have effect on revenues within a particular. An example would be San Joaquin County with their Amazon facilities and other major facilities. If the state law that tries to anticipate how the Wayfair decision should be implemented across states, is not written correctly, then the Amazon sales taxes may be collected in a more dispersed pattern across the state rather than out of San Joaquin County, which was the intent when they located those facilities.
So my reason, I mean, like you said, this might be above my pay grade too, but Moraga, which doesn't have a big revenue base, relies on sales tax.
Right.
My understanding had been that we were getting a piece of that if the ultimate shipment point for the order was a Moraga address.
That's the question.
And is that not happening right now under California law when we passed our internet tax?
I think there is a requirement at some point, and I just don't have this down tight yet, that California law needs to demonstrate that it's in compliance with the points that the Supreme Court set out as kind of guidance. And that's what it comes down to.
This is something that I need to read to understand a little bit better.
Yes, and there have been at least one joint Rev and Tax Committee meeting between the two houses, and there's a lot of material there. I'll make sure that the materials are available so that you can get a better handle on what's at stake.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Anything else? Nope. We have no action here. Do we need to approve this or recommend approval?
Recommend approval of the platforms, please.
All right, I'll entertain a motion. It's been moved and seconded, moved by Newell, seconded by Bob. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We can move on to our next item, which I believe is the consideration of the CAFR. And accept annual audit reports for the year ended June 30, 2018.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm here this morning to present to you our annual audit reports, specifically our CAFR, our annual CAFR, and then we also have the annual audit to discuss. We have Annie Louie, who is a partner here with MGO. She's here to talk about that piece after I go through my presentation on the CAFR. So I always like to start it off with what is the CAFR. We kind of break it into three different sections. We have the introductory section, which has a transmittal letter where the authority tries to describe our business, talks about some of the achievements and some of the transactions that happen throughout the year. On an annual basis, after we accept the CAFR here, we go ahead and we apply for an award with the GFOA. We've received it 6 years in a row. Hopefully we'll be on our way to the 7th. And then also in the introductory section, we have the organizational chart. And then we also have, on the following page after that, we have a list of representatives like yourself and who your alternates are as well. And then we get into the financial section of the CAFR. We go through the government-wide section, which takes all the accruals, amortizations. Now with the pension and the OPEB reporting, we have to add the accruals in there for the deferred inflows and outflows, and then we go into the notes to the financials. That really goes through and it explains everything, whether it be the cash, whether it be the bonds, and then it goes through the pension and OPEB obligations as well. And then it follows up with a 10-year look back that adds financial, economic, and demographic information in there. So this is a snapshot of the 2 years, year over year. So the changes from 2017 to 2018. As we look at this, it gives our cash balances. We have, it's about $230 million available. $72 million is restricted. That's bond proceeds and capitalized interest that's sitting there to be used, and future bond payments that are sitting in there. As we go down, we have the deferred outflows of resources and the deferred inflows of resources. Again, those are all related to the OPEB and pension reporting. The OPEB and pensions reports on a year behind, so you have the current year transactions that are happening, as well as interest earnings and different things like that. Under the liabilities, we have the long-term debt. That's our outstanding debt that we have. And then it ends the year, we have a negative net position. The reason of that, we carry debt. We don't carry assets, so we spend all this money. We bond against all of these projects. We, at the end of the time, when we're done building the Balfour Road, it becomes part of Caltrans. When we build projects that are within each individual cities, it becomes part of your assets in your individual cities as well. So our statement of activities, governmental activities, that again has the amortization and accruals of a lot of the transactions that happen after the end of the year and related to our bonds. Sales tax went up about $5.7 million. That's about 6.8%. General revenues, which is typically just our interest income, with the rising interest rates, we're starting to see a benefit from that. You can look at our program revenues. Program revenues are operating grants and contributions that are coming from outside sources like the ECRFA, RM2, some state funding as well. You can see that number is reduced. Last year, one of the biggest projects we had was Balfour. Again, we had an agreement with ECRFA that we would use Measure J funds first. So next year, you're going to see that number increase on the operating grants and contributions, and we're also starting 2 other major projects. So that's always a fluctuations. We've never lost funding. It's just the timing of these projects, whether they be just starting or whether we're right in the middle of these projects and collecting the funds. The administration, you can see, went from $3.6 million down to $2.1. The difference in there is in the prior year we had the payment of $1.2 million for the Measure X. As we go down, you look at the programs. Programs are typically an allocation of the sales tax we receive. So every single program we have in there, we collect a certain percentage and then we allocate out. We have the LSM funds that are in there. So we have the 18% for the local cities, and then we have the 2.09% as well. You can see capital projects, the transportation projects, again, went from about $81 million to $69 million. That's just the timing of the projects. And as we go down towards the bottom, one of the important pieces in there is the change in accounting principles. What that is, that's the restatement of the OPEB balance, since that's new for this year. We had to go in and add what the balance was as of 7/1/2017. So we had to restate our position in that piece there. So if we look at the financial highlights, which I kind of covered already, we have the sales tax that's up 6.8%. We have our local, state, and revenues that is about $5.9 million. Some of the bigger components in there is congestion management, gets about $1.3 million. CIP projects only received about $2.7 million. That's, again, we've been using the Measure J funds. TFCA is up a little bit this year. We're up at about $1.6 million. And then on the PDA planning area, it's only $270,000. As we're phasing that project out, we've completed a lot of components for the cities in there. We always like to talk about our administrative salaries and benefits was $629,000. We have a 1% cap on the sales tax, so therefore we're at about 0.7%. Again, local streets is about $8.3 million. Transportation projects, the big one that I mentioned was the Balfour Road at $22 million. The I-80 carpool and central interchange improvements was about $6.5 million last year. So far, last year we spent about $4 million on the I-680 carpool lane, and then we also had some closeout costs and some continuing costs related to the Caldecott for the closeout as well as landscaping. So on the debt service, we paid about $37 million, and about $15.2 million was for principal. And then we had transfers in. The transfers in is in June of 2017, we issued a $100 million bond, the 2017 bond, and so we used about $42.3 million to cover some of the Measure J transportation projects. So the notes to the financials, again, is where we dive into each of the components of the CAFR and talk about and give a lot of detail of all the transactions that happen. So one of the big things for all of the cities that you probably saw at your city is the implementation of GASB 75, which is the Accounting and Financial Reporting for Post-Employment Benefits, also known as OPEB. So it required the restatement July 1st that I talked about, which is $506,000. And then we go into the cash and investments, which is a big piece. So we had about $230 million at the end of the year. $157 million was invested, and the investments were segregated into $131 million that we have invested, and then we have about $26.3 million in LAIF. And then we have about $72.3 million that's for the debt service fund. So the project fund is about $58 million, and the difference between the 72 and the 58 is we have capitalized interest and we have accrued principal and interest payments that we've been paying into it. And those payments happen on September 1st and March 1st, so we add money as we go along through the year. The long-term bonds is about $489 million as of June 30th last year. And the swap agreement had a fair value loss at 6/30 of $30.6 million. Just a little added note, I think the highest it's been is it went as high as $70 million throughout the life of the swap agreement. So we get into notes 7 and 8, which is the pension and OPEB. It goes through and it explains each one of the programs for the authority and talks about the benefits that are being provided, and it also talks about the liability that we have. CalPERS is always 1 year behind on their reporting, so we report the fiscal year, the June 30th, 2017. And in order to have that flow through the financials, you'll see those deferred inflows and outflows that are part of the CAFR. The pension liability is $1.1 million. The pension liability has increased a little bit as they are reducing the discount rate, which is the amount of money that we're receiving on our projected through the life of our program. It was a 7.5%. They're going to reduce it down to, I believe it's like 6.75% eventually. And so the life expectancy has also increased a little bit. And then our OPEB liability is $19,000 as of 2017, which is good. And then note 11 talks about the net position and fund balances. Again, we don't carry any assets. We have the debt, so therefore it sits at a $557 million. So the statistical section breaks down the financial trends, the revenue capacity, the debt capacity, economic demographic information, and operational information over a 10-year look back. For me, I find it interesting to look at it. You can obviously see that the revenue has increased since 2010. You can also see the changes in the capital program. You can also see the changes since we started administering the programs, how much outside money is now inflowing into CCTA to create these projects, and that pretty much covers the CAFR piece. So again, I have Annie Louise. She's with MGO, and she will cover the audit piece and the letter from the auditors.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, Annie Lee from MGO. Thank you for the presentation, Brian. I'm here to take any questions that you may have about the audit process. I am happy to report that as the result of our financial statements audit, we were able to issue an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that you can achieve under any financial statements audit. And we do not have any audit deficiencies to report at this point. I'd like to turn your attention to the report to the board. This is our report directly to this body regarding regarding any significant matters that we may have come across during the audit process. The first item starting on page 1 of the report highlights the qualitative aspects of the audit, and it goes into any significant estimates that are embedded in the financial statements. As you may be familiar with the financial statements, the fair value of the investments as well as the swap agreement is two of the more significant estimates that are included in the financial statements. On the next page, you'll also see the valuation of your net pension liability as well as now the net OPEB benefits. Those are significant estimates as well because the numbers are based on an actuarial valuations provided by CalPERS. Okay. The rest of the report goes through a list of required items that we are required to report under auditing standards, such as any difficulties that we may have encountered during the audit or any disagreements with management in regards to the treatment of accounting principles or financial reporting standards. I'm happy to report that we did not have any disagreements with management. And as I have mentioned, we do not have any audit deficiencies to report during this audit period. The last page of this report does include a what we call an uncorrected financial statement misstatement. What this is what we believe to be correct under generally accepted government standards that have not been reflected in the financial statements. This is not a material impact on the financial statements, and that is why we agreed to not record that for this particular year. With that, I will take any questions that you may have about the audit.
Any questions on this item? Noel.
Sort of question, comments, and this may be more for Brian. So, pension liability. This is not news. We know, based on what CalPERS has been telling us, we knew that they would change the discount rate, and we know when they're going to change it. So in there, we show the different levels. So we're picking the current day one, and we're $1,147,000. So 3 years ago, we paid it to get to a net zero liability. We need to change our methodology. We knew this was going to happen. We knew exactly that's going to happen, and you can look at the chart and know what it will be next year. And I can tell you what it will be 2 years from now. We are not budgeting that way. Just because we're noting it doesn't mean we're dealing with it. We need to pay attention. And if you look at our liability and you want to stay under the 1%, whether we shift bodies around and things or whatever, that liability is so big and going to get big. And when the real liability we know because the rate that they're getting is not the rate that they're using, right? So there's a disparity, and they want to level this out over time. So we know what it is. In fact, it's in the report. We need to do a better job. This agency was not going to be like others. That should be close. You know, we've only got $19,000 in OPEC cost. But we also can see, you move over what the real rate is. What was that rate? What was that number? That's a huge number. We need to be conservative in this, just like we need to, when we get to the next item, we need to talk about how we do estimating on our sales tax. We need to take that conservative approach. And I say this because I come from a town that we have the lowest per capita revenue, highest property taxes, but our formula is a bad one. We have to live within our means. We take a very conservative way. And I think we need to have a cultural change to start to address that, because one more bump, this will triple. And then it'll quadruple. I mean, it's going to catch up with us. And we're a tiny little agency. We want to be that agency that is forward-thinking. So I'd like to suggest to hear a plan to come back with, we know what we're going to look at 5 years, 6 years. We know what CalPERS is saying. What is our plan to stay ahead of that? Because otherwise, just listing it, that's not a solution. That's just an admission. So how do we get to coming up with a plan to address it? So not an answer today, but like to make sure we're looking at that, incorporate it into our budget as we go forward this spring, how we will begin to package that so that we are that forward-thinking agency. Otherwise, I think, this is still great. Brian, you guys do an awesome job. The detail here is fantastic. I just think in that and how we do our projections to the more conservative side will make us continue to keep us as that premier agency in terms of our financial management. Thank you.
And Brian, if you have any response, I know he didn't. I know Niels wasn't looking for a response now, but personally, I'd be interested in hearing what your initial thoughts are. I'm not going to hold you to anything.
The pension and OPEB liability has been something that I've been very concerned about for years, and we acted upon it in May of 2015. And we've internally been talking about it and addressing and looking at avenues for funding it. It obviously makes prudent sense to make it happen. And so we'll be back. We'll be back very soon.
Comments?
Comments, yes, Bob.
Yeah, the cities, a lot of cities don't know what the hell's going on with that. But complimentary to you, but i.e. Brentwood has been very involved in that. In fact, we paid, we're not as good as CCTA, but we paid 10 years in advance following CCTA's deal on the OPED. But again, some of these cities are just going to get caught, and like I'm looking at 24 to 36 months from now, they're not going to know what hit them either. So I think if we can set some type of precedent of what this organization is doing, it could wake up a few municipalities in that same sense. So the eyes of the world will be looking at you, Brian. Just want to
The eyes of the world.
So
No pressure.
No pressure. But then on another issue, and this probably goes to you also, you did a great job on the audit. Thank God you came up with nothing. So that's, to me, take care of that. But the RM3 money, is this the time to address that? Or
Not yet.
On the next issue? We'll go to the next issue. Okay. Anyway, thank you so much for your audit. I know this is a heck of an organization. I've been very surprised if you found anything. But since you're going to be with us a little while longer, right? Keep looking.
This is our last year of the contract.
Oh, it's your last year, so you
It's
got
our
to.
last year contract. But I would like to thank management on behalf of my audit team on the assistance and cooperation that have been provided to us.
Okay. Well, if you come back, just do what you were doing. Just keep looking, because we're very keep digging. Just make sure we're all on the right road. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay. That's sufficient motion for all these purposes? Yes? All right. And there was a second? Second by Tom. Motion by Newell. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And we're on to our next item, which is Regional Measure 3 status update on the recent request by MTC staff to provide initial project reports along with next steps to position the Contra Costa jurisdictions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Hisham Noemi. I'm the engineering manager at CCTA. This is an informational item. We wanted to give you an update on the status of Regional Measure 3. MTC has asked the project sponsors to submit their initial project reports on November 19, providing information on the scopes, costs, and timelines, including when they expect to seek Regional Measure 3 allocations and for what phase of their project. CCTA is listed as a sponsor on several projects with about $360 million in funding. This number, as you recall, used to be much lower. It used to be $150 million if it wasn't for the effort of this board, Amy, Julie, and others, as well as our executive staff to push back on MTC and ask for more funding for Contra Costa. Attachment A in your staff report lists summarizes our submittal to MTC. As you know, RM3, which passed by the voters in June of 2018, raised the bridge tolls by a total of $3 over 6 years, and it's expected to generate about $5.5 billion over a 25-year period. Contra Costa residents pay about 18% of the tolls. So technically, we should, if we get our fair share, we should get about $1 billion in funding. There are many regional categories in RM3 that we could get funding from beyond the $360 million that's under our name. MTC had assumed in their benefit analysis that Contra Costa share will be closer to the $1 billion mark, but we wanted to make sure that the board is aware that it will take very close coordination with MTC and other agencies like WETA and Capital Corridors and AC Transit to be successful in competing for the regional categories. We included in the packet in attachment B a list of projects, candidate projects, that we will be aiming to fund from these regional categories as well as the operational categories in RM3. They include projects such as the I-680 northbound express lanes, the ferry service in West County and Martinez and Antioch, express bus service on I-80 and I-680, as well as other projects. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments? Any questions?
Well, I guess, through the chair, I guess what I was expressing as I was going through this, you said $1 billion. Am I correct? What did you say?
I said if we were to go by the amount of tolls that the share of the tolls that Contra Costa residents get, we should be getting about $1 billion as opposed to overall. Over the 25 years, we should be getting about $1 billion as opposed to only the $360 million, and that's currently in our name in RM3.
So the 360 was the previous sum. So we're talking now to get to the billion, correct?
Correct.
So that's above the 360? I'm confused on the numbers.
No, it's
Help me out.
the $1 billion does include the 360. So
it does include,
yes,
because you really got me excited when I thought, wow, we're going to get another jolt.
Yeah. So just to be clear, the 360 is pretty much guaranteed for us because we are listed as the sponsor. It's to get to the $1 billion where the work is ahead of us to work with every other agency to make sure we
I
get
guess
there.
what I'm asking you and the director, is there a priority list? I saw this as a wish list. No, this is all priority. In other words, you follow what I'm trying to
Yes.
say?
These, Mr. Taylor, these are the attachment B in your staff report
Right.
lists the projects that would be eligible to be funded from the regional category.
No,
It's not an exhaustive list. We could find out a few years from now that there are other projects that would qualify under the descriptions in the regional categories that we could compete for. So it's not an exhaustive list.
Commissioners, anytime we see money that we can compete for, we get very, very excited. And so we have analyzed the RM3 legislation. There are some direct allocations, which Hisham is talking about, and those are for the projects that are listed, which a very important intermodal center in Brentwood is listed.
Right.
And Vasco Road is listed.
Vasco Road.
The kind of airport connector.
But
Those projects, we're the sponsor. We've written an IPR, and that's in the hands of MTC. What Hisham is talking about are those regional pots of money that we're going to have to compete for, that in order to placate us, as we were complaining about the lack of dollars for Contra Costa, we were told that we would get a portion of, for example, ferry service. So we're going to ask Commissioner Butt to sign a letter reminding MTC and WETA that we need some dollars for the operations for the ferry service. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is give you a briefing on what is in the mix for project-specific dollars, and then where we're going to need help, reminding MTC staff that there were some commitments made early on about how they were going to fund Contra Costa projects out of those regional pots of money, including express lanes, for example. There's $300 million available for the 9 Bay Area counties for express lanes. Our project, northbound, is going to get ready to go here pretty soon, and we want an allocation of those dollars. What's holding this up is there's a challenge to RM3. Is it a fee or is it a tax? And so allocations aren't being made now. What we're pushing for is an allocation out of RM2 to jumpstart some of these projects that are ready to go, because they're cheaper to do today than they are tomorrow. And so we're going to need your help on some of the regional pots of money, sending letters as a reminder that a portion of those dollars early on were committed to Contra Costa.
Well, I think that's where I was going with trying to figure out what was their attainability of trying to capture those funds. So what we need to do is go over there and sit in the chambers and let them know we're here.
Yes, sir.
And we're here for a check. Okay, so that's because when I went over this, I wasn't quite sure how it all mixed. Newell's always my accountant, so
Well, just to make sure I'm clear, that the $360 million is what we believe is committed, and we're solid on that. It's really on the second sheet. That's the ones that we believe we should be participating in. So the other couple $100 million, we're going to have to make sure every time be on record for every one of those categories that there is a proportionate share that needs to come for all of these things. Okay.
yeah, that's what I wanted.
So help me out on this basic math then. We have the 360. The staff report says that we have another list of projects totaling $280 million. That gets you to $640 million, but we're trying to get to $1 billion. So we're still about $360,000 short. Am I missing that? $360 million short of, and so I'm trying to understand process.
So actually,
and do we have to, get on our horses now and ride, or is there going to be another opportunity to develop a future list of projects over the course of RM3 to get other things paid for? That's question one. The other question is how local can these dollars be, as opposed to, quote, regional, before we cross a line? Do you understand what I'm trying to say here?
I think that if you look in attachment B, that the total amount is about $554 million, including the regional categories as well as the operational categories, the ones that we will use to fund ferry service, express bus service, and so on. So it's the 280 is really capital projects, and like 273 is for operations that we're anticipating for the next 10 years. But to answer your questions, the test will be when we compete for this project, is it eligible for the category? There is, for example, a category for safe routes to transit, Bay Trail gap closure. This money can be used anywhere in Contra Costa County and the region, so it could be local projects. Other projects like the express lanes that Randy mentioned, we have the northbound express lanes, for example, that could be eligible and is eligible to compete for this.
So the case is going to have to be made in every case that a particular project helps to ease regional traffic
Correct.
problems or patterns. Okay. So even with these numbers, we're still a couple $100 million.
This is not an exhaustive list. Right. This is what we could think about at this time, because RM3 is going to go on forever, basically.
Yeah. And there'll be other slices of funding that we'll be able in the future try to compete for.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess the question I'm asking, we didn't get a full allocation of RM3 money.
If I understand your question correctly, we only were able to be listed as a sponsor for $360 million worth of projects in RM3. So these are going to be guaranteed allocations to us. Nobody else can compete with us for that money.
No, I guess I'm talking about for the year, we did not receive full
it's
allocation.
Not.
So will we catch up?
They don't start collecting until January 1st of next year, assuming the
litigation is settled. Yes.
This is the next year, or in a few days.
So it's going to go January 1.
Yes, but what we try to do is get an advanced allocation, much like when Measure J was passed in 2004. You started working on projects using commercial paper loans in order to jumpstart, which makes a lot of sense.
In other words, you're already on the road.
We're trying to get on the road. This has been an uphill battle from the day we saw the expenditure plan via a picture from Sacramento using somebody's iPhone saying, here's the expenditure plan, and we don't see a lot for Contra Costa.
So give us some historical perspective there, Randy. When we first saw that cell phone with that schedule, was it how much below $360 million were you looking
Is it
at?
about a third?
What we were at 150. There was only one project on the list in Contra Costa. The 150 million.
We
for
saw the
six-
list.
So you more than doubled it. I guess, no, from 150 to 360.
Yeah, so we went, saw the picture. Hisham and I developed a set of principles. The first is nexus to the toll bridge. There's got to be some nexus for the toll bridge, because that's who's paying for it, is toll bridge payers. Second was, you've taught staff this over, at least in my 9 years here, equity. The third one, it should eliminate congestion on the toll bridge. That's the money maker. So you want more people, in theory, going across the toll bridges to make more money. And the fourth is nothing against the state legislators, but really the RTPAs or the counties or the regions should pick the projects, because we know what's ready to go. So Tim and Hisham have a list of projects in their readiness, so that's also been statused. So we started out at about 150 million, which was really, we started complaining in Sacramento. And I haven't spent that much time in Sacramento since I worked in Sacramento. And we were getting yelled at by a lot of different people over the fact that we were asking for too much. And all we were saying is we're asking for what's fair. And so we cut all the projects, a lot of them in Santa Clara County. The problem is the bill was sponsored by Senator Bell out of Santa Clara. So he was mad at us because we were cutting his projects, but there's no toll bridges in theory in Santa Clara County. Napa, no toll bridge. Sonoma, Golden Gate, maybe. So we fought hard, and there are some side agreements here that you don't see. But we're trying to figure out how to now compete for those regional pots of money that initially, in order to quiet, maybe have us be more in agreement, there were some charts done that said, Contra Costa, you're eligible for X, and for example, in ferry operations, which we have a ferry operation. We have pledged $32 million of Measure J. What we would like is supplant the $32 million of Measure J, put that back into our coffers, and use regional ferry operation money. That's what the money is supposed to do. And then we can take that $45 million that's in Measure J and allocate it another way between Hercules and Richmond to do, let's say, capital improvements to get Hercules ready to go, or make improvements in the ferry service or the terminal around Richmond. So we want to leverage those dollars. It's not like we're asking for a handout. We're going to use some of our own money to leverage their money. I mean, I think that's the way we operate, and I think that's the way the region should operate. But it took a lot of effort to get us to where we are, and what we're trying to tell you is a lot of those agreements that were, maybe not side agreements, but agreements for a portion of the regional pots of money, we know what they are, and when we're not getting them, we're asking our board to send letters or go to the meetings to say, hey, wait a minute, we have a ferry service that's ready to go. You may not want to fund it out of WIDA money, but you've got RM3, and that part of that should be going to Contra Costa. So we're preparing a letter for Mayor Butt to go out and send a letter to WIDA, the WIDA board, saying, we've got a project ready to go. It's going to start January the 10th, and we want to portion our fair share of the operations money.
Well, that's kind of where when I went through the list, I was trying to figure out how are we going to accomplish this without a whole lot of work on, actually, the board needs to be very involved, probably until we figure out this RM3 money. I don't think it's still figured out yet.
Correct. So you, the board, was very involved with staff from the start. It wasn't just Tim and I going to Sacramento. It was Julie, Amy, and others making phone calls.
Right.
Or paying visits to our legislators to say, this is what we want. Our projects are ready to go. It's not like we're asking for projects that are just, hey,
Out of the sky.
Yeah, let's build a tunnel from Moraga
Road
Moraga,
down
yeah,
underneath
underneath
to the freeway direct.
But
One guy actually floated at one point in time who's not going to be on the council in Lafayette much longer.
But never discount those wild ideas, because sometimes they come true.
Yeah, you're right.
But I just wanted to, and hopefully the members that are here kind of agree with me. A lot of times we're at various meetings, organizations, so Bob Taylor has been known to chat.
Really?
And I think what we need to do is kind of perhaps have a kind of a script if we run into someone. I'd like to really be kept updated of kind of where we're at throughout, not every 90, I don't know, whenever you guys, the staff tells me, but where we're at and who are we pressing and what we need to do, because we're at a lot of different things. And that conversation over a cup of coffee or something is kind of
Valuable.
very valuable.
Yes.
So that's where I was kind of coming from, because I saw this as a huge wish list, and I want to wish that it is our list.
Yeah, we don't look at it as a wish list. We look at it as an agreement list.
Oh, okay. Well, no,
that
I'll
we
accept
had
that.
with certain folks that said these are commitments to help make us rise up to 18.4%. And so if you add the projects that we think we're going to get the dollars, it's around 900 million, 914?
914, 18.2%.
So we're close. But that's if the regional pots of money come through, and that's where we need your help. And so we'll be happy to write up a set of talking points for your areas on what you should be talking about, and then give you an overall listing. That's what we're trying to do here, is just give you an appraisal of what's happening so far. And we've submitted our IPRs for the projects that we're sponsors, and then we are now trying to fight for our regional pots of money.
Thank you for that trip down memory lane, Randy. Appreciate it. And you talked about the fact there are no toll bridges in I guess, Santa Clara County. It's a close call, but you're right. Dumbarton is probably a mile north, and still in San Mateo.
Yes, you're right. You're correct. But how much of the, let's use the Diridon station as an example. How much of the improvements there are going to eliminate congestion on a toll bridge? I don't even know where it is.
Downtown San Jose.
I've never been, so.
Right. There was a big story on it yesterday. Yeah.
I do know where the Richmond Ferry is, though.
Yeah, well, I'm probably showing off my Stanford roots. I've taken the Dumbarton Bridge more times than I want to count, but yeah. All right. Any other questions or input on this item? Are we good? We're being asked here to get information. Thank you. Appreciate that update. Next up is yes, this is update to our 2019 Measure J strategic plan. Seeking action on that. And I guess, Hisham, you're still up.
Yes, thank you. We are asking you today for your approval to kickstart the process to develop the 2019 strategic plan. My presentation today will focus on some of the factors that will shape this update as outlined in the staff report. It'll be great if I can take the questions at the end so I can get through my presentation quickly. We are now in year 10 of Measure J since it became effective on April 1st, 2009. We still have 15 more years to go before it expires. The Measure J expenditure plan assigned funding to specific projects and programs to be funded. If you add up their funding, it totals $2 billion in 2004 dollars. It's important to note that the expenditure plan did not have a line item for financing costs for projects, nor did it have a contingency for revenue reductions, such as the one caused by the Great Recession in 2008. Unlike programs where they get a fixed percentage of our annual revenues, spending only accumulated funds, the authority took the strategy of financing projects to accelerate their delivery. By issuing bonds against the project portion of our revenues, future revenues, we were able to take advantage of good construction bid climate, low interest rates, and one-time infusion of state and federal money like Proposition 1B in 2006 and the stimulus funding 2009. This strategy allowed us to provide benefits to the public years ahead of when it would have been otherwise possible. At this time, all bonds have been issued, and 2/3 of the project in the strategic plan are either in construction or have already been constructed. To determine how much funding we have for the project, we have to take into consideration changes to our revenue projections, as well as debt service costs, since debt service costs have the first call on our revenues. This is why we do the strategic plan. It is really meant to answer a simple question: how much a project will get in funding and when, while taking into consideration our assumptions on revenue forecast, financing costs, project readiness, and sub-regional equity. The 2019 strategic plan will be the 6th update since the first one you adopted in 2007. The board committed to update the strategic plan every 2 to 3 years to revisit assumptions on revenue growth, debt service costs, as well as project's cash flow needs. While our focus is on the next 5 to 7 years, we keep an eye on what happens at the end of the measure 15 years from now. The goal is to accelerate project delivery in all subregions of our county while ensuring our commitments do not exceed our revenues. Since you adopted the 2016 strategic plan in March of 2016, we had 3 consecutive years of revenue growth. We also were able to complete the issuance of all of our bonds and restructure our debt, saving us about $11 million and reducing our risk. All but $100 million in bonds have now fixed interest rate costs. In regard to the overall transportation funding landscape, we have now 2 new fund sources we didn't have 3 years ago, the RM3 and the SP1. This will help us get some of our projects funded, potentially reducing the demand on our Measure J funds. By following the 4-pronged strategy you see on this slide, we have delivered 2/3 of the Measure J projects in the strategic plan. The projects that are completed or under construction have brought us $1.7 billion in other fund sources. If you look only at the authority-administered project, our leverage rate has historically been about 3-to-1, while it's closer to 2-to-1 for our partner agencies. These are the sample of the major projects in the strategic plan that we've completed since you last adopted the 2016 strategic plan in March 2016. We had ribbon cutting on this project, Highway 4 project, on July 2016. We had ribbon cutting on the I-80 Smart Corridor in September 2016. E-BART service to Antioch started in May 2018. And construction was done on the I-80 Central project in Richmond in September 2018. I just want to note that while we were out there, we worked closely with Richmond to also repave a horrible segment of the road, adding striping for bike lanes and fixing ADA ramps. And we accepted the contract on the first phase of the I-80 San Pablo Dam Road interchange project in July 2018. This was one of the first completed ATP-funded projects in the in the region. Over 200 daily crossings to an elementary school are now done without having to cross a major arterial. And we will be having ribbon cutting on this project next week, December 10. And there are 2 major projects that are now under construction in Central County, Southwest County. We had groundbreaking on this project, the southbound express lane on 680 on October 3rd of this year, and the long-awaited I-680 for Phase 3 project We will be having groundbreaking in January for this one. You awarded the contract in October of this year. Now, I will move into the factors which will shape the next strategic plan. I'll start with the revenue forecast, which is the most important factor. As I mentioned, we had 3 consecutive years of sales tax growth, with growth rates ranging from 2% to about 6.8%. However, when you compare it to what we were projecting in the last strategic plan, we are off overall by about 2.5%, or $6.5 million, which is pretty close by any standard, but because Measure J expires in 15 years, we do have limited time to make up any deficit, especially if we're going to hit a slowdown in the economy. We hired HDL to update our forecast. They are a reputable firm who specialize in this type of work and have worked closely with the Board of Equalization in the past and their replacement agency. Bobby Young is here to help answer any questions you may have, but at the end of the presentation, if possible. In terms of the revenue forecast, most economists agree that we will be entering a period of slow growth because of several factors. Higher interest rates combined with increased cost of goods and less deductibles on tax returns are quoted are some of the reasons to contribute to less spending in the near future. HDL looked at the potential impact on the different sectors in our economy and produced 3 scenarios for the authority consideration, with the baseline scenario being the most likely outcome. This chart displays the 3 different scenarios for our sales tax revenue. The blue line on the chart is the baseline, the red dotted is the conservative, and the optimistic line is shown in green dots. And I'm also showing you the old projections from the 2016 strategic plan. I want to note that in both the baseline and the conservative scenarios, we are assuming no growth for the next 3 years until fiscal year 21. The projections diverge after the 3rd year, where the baseline scenario assumes a transition period of modest growth in 2022 before returning to a normal 4.5% growth in fiscal year 23 and beyond. Under the conservative scenario, only modest growth is assumed beyond fiscal year 21 at 3.5% per year. And under the optimistic scenario, we are not assuming a no growth period. Actually, it assumes that the growth rates will be at about 3.5% until fiscal year 23 before they go back to 4.5% in the outer years, similar to the baseline scenario. This table summarizes the outcome of the various scenarios when you compare them to the revenue projections in the last strategic plan, which had assumed that we will have about $2.72 billion in revenues by the end of the measure. If you adopt the baseline scenario, it's about 5% from what we assumed. The conservative scenario is about double that amount reduction. The optimistic scenario is similar to what's in the last strategic plan. This chart shows what our revenues did since Measure J was passed in 2004, going through the Great Recession between 2007 and 2010, and the recovery period afterwards. At this time, no one is predicting another Great Recession like the one we had. Just a slowdown in our economy. And the dotted line you see here in orange represents the baseline scenario. Staff is recommending adopting the baseline scenario for the development of the 2019 strategic plan. As I mentioned, the baseline and the conservative forecasts are pretty much the same for the next 3 years, at which point you will have another opportunity to update our projections as part of the strategic plan update. In our view, it's important that we be conservative in the short term, so we don't overcommit our revenues and deliver on the promises to the voters. The authority, again, will have an opportunity to review this again in 3 years and react if the economy does worse or if it does better than what we were projecting. Despite the reduction in our projected revenues, with the baseline scenario, we should be able to meet our commitments on current projects, but funding for future projects such as Innovate 680 will likely be impacted. We plan to work with the RTPCs over the next few months to determine the impact of the revenue reduction on the various projects in each subregion, future projects, I may add. Moving on into the next factor, the programming window of the strategic plan. Every update, we add 2 to 3 years to the strategic plan horizon. The last strategic plan looked out to fiscal year 21. We are recommending that you extend the horizon for this 2019 strategic plan by 4 more years to fiscal year 25, so we can match the programming windows for other documents such as the upcoming STIP, the 2020 STIP. Unlike prior STIP cycles where funding was not always guaranteed, we had sometimes negative actually estimates for STIP cycles. With the passage of SB1, we anticipate the STIP will play a major role in funding projects in the future as it guarantees funding to the STIP. We will move on to the expenditure caps. As I mentioned, because the expenditure plan, the Measure J expenditure plan, did not have a line item to pay for financing costs for the projects, nor did it have a contingency for revenue projections, for revenue reductions, I should say. The authority imposed expenditure caps on all project categories. This was a method that we used as well in Measure C since 1990. By capping the funding on the various project categories, we were able to address the revenue reductions and pay for and set aside funding to pay for our debt service costs. Caps don't have to apply evenly across all the project categories. In the past, we provided the RTPCs the flexibility to determine the cap level in each category in their subregion, as long as they meet the average cap level. This allowed us to take into consideration factors such as existing commitments, commitments that we've already made, sub-regional priorities, and other availability of other funds to do the project, as well as other factors. We anticipate, because of the revenue reductions, caps will need to be tightened further in the 2019 strategic plan. We recommend you keep your past practice of providing the RTPCs the flexibility to determine the cap level on the projects in their subregions. Subregional equity. Subregional equity has been a long-standing goal of the authority. During the development of the Measure J expenditure plan, some subregions placed more of their share in projects while others placed more in programs. The chart on the left shows the breakdown of Measure J project funding by subregion in 2004 dollars. As you can see, many of the projects in the expenditure plans were actually in East County, about half of them, while the least were in West County, only about 8%. The picture, when you look at the programs, the picture is almost reversed, where most of the programs were in West County. This is okay because we are a diverse county and each part of the county is different than the other. When you look at the strategic plan, the percentage of total funding program to project in each subregion will resemble the percentages on the left chart. We try to avoid a situation where we program all the funds in one subregion in the early years and nothing in another subregion. However, because we are now reaching the end of the delivery of our projects, because we have delivered already 2/3 of them, we anticipate having minor deviations from these percentages. In this update, we're talking about 1%, 1 to 2%, not more. If we take West County as an example, they have the least amount of funding projects, and most of it has already been spent or committed. This will limit how much we can reduce their project funding to match their share of the revenue reduction. We may need to capitalize one of their programs, like their additional TLC money they get, or that way we can cap it, and their cap becomes consistent with the other subregions. By capitalizing a program, you are basically allowing the transfer of the program money to the project categories. Then once you do that, then you can cap it, and that helps you achieve your funding reduction. At this time, we are recommending that you postpone addressing this deviation in this update. Postpone addressing such deviation to the next update in 3 years in the 2021 strategic plan, whereas there will be more certainty about our revenues, because we're not planning to have another call for projects for like the TLC and the bid bike programs for another 5 years. We're not taking your ability to react if our revenues tank further. Last but not least, in prior strategic plans, the board adopted a policy to set aside funding in each subregion to deal with the unforeseen cost increases on authority-administered projects. The good news is that most of the projects we completed had savings. We are recommending that you only maintain the construction reserve in Central County at this time, since we have 2 major projects underway, the 680 southbound express lane and the 684 interchange. This way, the impact of the revenue reduction will be lessened, and future funding for the projects will increase slightly. And we talked about, as we mentioned in the prior agenda item, CCTA was listed as a sponsor on $360 million worth of projects in RM3. Some of these projects, like the I-680 transit improvements, also have Measure J money. To the extent we can use RM3 funds first, we can reduce the impact of the revenue reduction on our Measure J cash flow. And with SB1, I finally wanted to note that because of SB1, we were able to get the 684 Phase 3 project funded. We got $54 million from the state, slightly below what we asked, which was about $58 million. We also anticipate to get $2.3 million per year now from the formula portion of the local partnership program in SB1. This will help us fund projects that we could not fund from Measure J due to the revenue reduction. I also want to note that our executive staff will be lobbying the CTC to change the formula they use to split the local partnership money between the competitive portion and the formulaic portion. This way we are guaranteed to get more funding from this source. And in terms of the schedule, we plan to work with the RTPCs over the next few months to determine the impact of the revenue reductions on the various projects in each subregion. We are targeting to complete the strategic plan by July of 2019. And thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yep, thank you, Hisham. Any questions or comments? Newell.
Well, thank you for that. This is obviously perfect timing to look at this. The high-level view is, and I've always had a concern, I think others have had, that it's the way we estimate sales tax. Obviously, the better we estimate it in terms of that it's greater, it looks good and everybody's happy, but then we make cuts. And it's clear by the history that the past 3 years, which is the best economy we've seen in our lifetime, bar none, we didn't hit those revenue projections, which means that methodology needs to go away and we need to come back with what's being proposed. But I have to tell you, and again, I say this because of the uniqueness of the community I live in, for 20-something years, we've hit all of our projections, and we're always on the conservative side. Government does really well when it has excess money. It does not perform well when it runs short. The amount of cuts that we had to make in the Great Recession were horrific to some programs. We are now going to be, for the next 15 years, more programmatic. And those programs are designed to grow slightly each year just because of inflation and things like that. That as much as I appreciate the three scenarios in what projections, we ought to be taking the conservative projection because we know the next 3 years. Will we have a recession? We'll have 2 recessions in the next 15 years. It's just the normal ebbs and flows of investment. Will we have as great of recession that we had back 2009? Not as likely, but probable. And the reason why is we did put safeguards into place on a national level for some of the banking system. We've also in the past 2 years gotten rid of some of those. So some of the risks have come back that could cause more major, rapid changes in our economy, as well as there are new types of financial entities and transactions out there that are totally unregulated right now. Those have the potential, too, to have an impact back on our economy. In 6 years, while the United States is still the largest GDP in the world, we will become number 2. So I know it's going to be hard. I think we have to. We have no evidence to say that we shouldn't do the conservative estimate. There's absolutely no basis, no support, which means it's going to be a little bit tougher cut. But it's better to know it now to be able to plan for that. And if there's excess revenues, those programs can enjoy that, right? Because we do have this equity, and I think we've set it up. But our history absolutely tells us what the solution is in this case. So from my seat representing the 19 cities, I would really advocate that we take that conservative on revenue. Let us do the things that we need to do planning for the next 15 years, and should those revenues change to the better, because we are not doing public entities we work for, thank you. We actually do project those. And we were fortunate we projected a downturn, so our hit to our residents never saw any difference, even though our revenues dropped, just like everybody else's. I don't know that we can do that in this type of agency in the same way, because we don't provide the same types of services. But we can take that conservative approach. And I just say let's call it the fiscally responsible planning tool that we have all of the history. We have a third-party firm that actually tells us that's actually the right one. We should do that. I also think we should still allow our TCPs, I always get that wrong, our TCPs.
SWAT.
Yes, but all of those. But those regional transportation entities, they should still have the authority. I don't want to change their authority, because there's a lot of history to that. We have equity and we have hidden inequity. Hidden inequities are in the SWAT area, the greatest contributor per capita of sales tax, but we don't get that fair share back. That's a contribution of that region to the global good. So I wouldn't go back through and start to change those. I just think we have to be more fiscally responsible based on our history to look at our revenue projections, and I think the construction contingencies that you mentioned, perfect. That's all we need. I don't think we need it on the programs. If we take the responsible conservative approach on revenue, If we're not going to do that, then we're going to have to put a contingency in there, because those will have disruptions that are dramatic, and those agencies will lose ferry service, will lose bus services. We shouldn't do that. I think the public expects us to have those programs continually to run. So the only way to do that is start planning for it now. And it's no different where we're talking about our pension liabilities and things like that. If you know it ahead of time, then we have a responsibility to do it. So I think the evidence is there. Long-winded way, I think that's the major change. I think the schedule and everything else is fine. But I think let's take our history and what we learned and apply it.
So, Newell, you're proposing that we not adopt a staff recommendation, and I'd be interested in what other committee members say about that. I mean, just one observation is I think it's much easier to project what pensions are going to do, what pension obligations and liabilities are going to happen, given that, the CalPERS has said they're going to reduce the discount rate and do all this other stuff. It's built in, and it's going to be bad. The baseline estimate of the baseline forecast does suggest there's going to be some downturn. So the baseline already has some downturn built into it. The question is it necessary to go, and reduce that baseline by another, roughly $60 million, $50 million over the 15 years. Right. So I mean, that's an interesting idea, and I think we need to see what others have to say about it.
Yeah, can I just add to what you just said?
Sure.
We've used baseline in the past.
Oh, no, I get that too.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Tom?
I think Neil's got a good point. Everybody's saying that, we're in the longest boom economy in history or something like that. And, at some point, hopefully it's not going to be a disaster, but at some point it's going to go downhill. And that's probably within the range that we're talking about right now. And I don't see a lot of downsides for doing that, there are some upsides. Of course, this discussion has to go to the whole board.
We're making a recommendation.
Right. But I agree with Newell. I think that I just don't see any downside to it, unless somebody can tell me what it is.
In the words of the late President Bush, it wouldn't be prudent not to do that?
I'd like to hear what Randy has to say.
Okay.
On the downside, you have a reduction in some of the projects that you want to start. That's really what the impact is. Because the impact's on the project side. We're trying to minimize the impact on the program side. So you're really looking at that 42.5% that we bond against. And that's really what we're talking about. So if you flatten the line further, you're going to run it out further, so that white space in the future for projects is going to dip down, so you'll have less flexibility because your first call is debt service. So that's really what you're talking about is, can you start Interstate 680, Innovate 680, projects on 680? There may not be capacity in the future because the first priority is to save that construction contingency just in case we have two major construction projects under construction now, 680, HOV Lane and 684. And they're very complex projects, believe it or not. And so there's a lot of potential there that Ivan and Tim and others are managing. So that's the impact, is those long-range projects you wanted to start now, you may have to start them later. And it may just be a challenge to staff to go out and try to leverage more money from somebody else.
So can I ask a question? We have other pots of money besides the Measure J sales tax. And that's not factored into this baseline versus conservative estimate. This estimate basically doesn't even know about that, doesn't care about that for purposes of coming up with an estimate. Does the fact that we think we have a decent shot at getting this regional money in militate, in favor of some optimism on what the actual revenues and capacity of the authority is to support projects?
Yes, sir. So we have an answer for that as well. So we're going to extend the programming window out to 4 years to match the STIP. The STIP, assuming SB1 stays and people still buy gas and there's still a fuel tax.
I just bought a new gasoline powered car.
That's fantastic. So
Thank
you're
you.
going to
There
be, so if the revenues stay the same,
A lot of it came to Moraga, I might add, but yeah. Okay.
yeah, so you have two things two pots of money that we started, RM3, and then SB1's the STIP piece. And part of the reason why we got 684 under construction is because we advanced the STIP. Just a few years ago, the CTC quit allocating projects because of the condition of the state highway account. So that's not factored in. For this purpose is for safeguarding our ability to make promises to the voters that we can stand by. And you're the board. If it's a baseline or it's a conservative approach, what staff does is we go back and analyze what can we start and what can't we start.
So can I don't know, maybe this is not the right time, and if you decide this question could be held, Randy, by all means. Something that Hisham said was, say he was referring to the fact that our executive staff was going to be going forward to the California Transportation Commission in the not-too-distant future and to lobby on a few things, and he was a little opaque on that. Is this the right time for you to talk about what you may be doing in that regard, or is it something that can wait? Should we complete this conversation?
Yeah, we were talking about split for the formulaic versus competitive part of the local partnership program. Right now, the split is 50-50 between both programs.
Okay.
And our share of the formulaic program is $2.3 million a year. We really want it to be more like 5%, 95% split, where 95% should be the formulaic part, because the program was intended to reward self-help counties. And if we're successful, that $2.3 million could double basically to about $4.5 or $4 million.
So our understanding of the intent of the legislature when SB1 passed was to kind of mirror some of the components of Proposition 1B. And in Proposition 1B, the local partnership program was exactly that. It was a reward for those counties that took the initiative to pass a sales tax. So 95% of those dollars went by formula to in those days it was the 20 counties that tax themselves, now it's 24. And then the remaining 5% was a competitive. Now it's 50% competitive, which we got $33.6 million. So, I mean, we can't fault that. But on the other side, we're squeezed down to $2.3 million per year. And so if that changes, we're going to get more money there. We're trying to maybe change the congested corridor guidelines so that we're agencies that are probably more forward-thinking, using technology to deploy to try to ease some of this congestion. We're trying to change the guidelines because normally they fund asphalt, concrete bridge, widening, those kinds of activities. And we can't widen 680, it's too narrow. And we can't widen 24, it's too narrow. So there's places that we just we can't widen. So those are the things that Hisham's talking about that we're engaged in now to try to invoke some change. And that will result potentially in more dollars for the self-help counties.
So Bob, does that enlighten you?
Sure. I'm trying to get to the question. I guess the question is, we listen. I don't know if we want to go back and rebuild the wheel that you presented today, but is there room in there to squeeze out talking points or actually construct a view of how we could, if we see in the world turn to, there's a basket in the hay basket or whatever the terminology is, we have the ability, am I correct, to come back and readjust, recorrect? Because when you get this in front of the full board, I'm sure that's going to be some of the questions. So I would ask, how do we, if the wheel has to be reconstructed,
yes,
can we put on them?
Can I speak to that too? Let me
Yes,
add on to
please.
that. The staff recommendation here is to adopt the baseline and indicates the authority will have the opportunity to revisit the revenue forecast in 2 years or sooner if economic conditions become worse. Maybe, it may be that this group may not have a consensus of a majority of the committee. But maybe the way to straddle this, which I think is where you're trying to come to, Bob,
Change the
is the
terminology.
recommendation would be that this would be would be revisited annually. So we would write that in as a matter of policy, not wait 2 years, but you would have a direction to be keeping really, really tight focus on this and bring it back.
Definitely.
So we don't get too deep into a trough and then have to make more painful decisions.
You will. Maybe I can just add a couple points, and Commissioner Newell, your points are well taken. Just maybe a couple pieces of information that I didn't present and you should know about. One of them is we do have a history. We've been in business since 1990. Our growth rates we had growth rates year to year that were over 14%, and we had some that were minus 14%, and they were all over the place. But since 1990, we went through multiple economic cycles, a lot of recessions, including the Great Recession, which was unprecedented. If you look at the period between 1990 and 2018, this year, our average growth rate, despite all these economic cycles, was about 3.5% per year, positive 3.5% per year. With the baseline scenario, if you decide that's the way you want to go, your average growth rate from 1990 through 2033 will be about 3.52%. It's pretty close to the average. If you adopt the conservative scenario and you look at the same period from 1990 to 2033, your average growth rate is about 3.26%, while the optimistic scenario is about 3.75%. So a quarter percent, the conservative will take you a 1/4% below, and the optimistic will be 1/4% higher than the baseline. So that's just one piece of information. The other one, if we decide to go with the conservative scenario, I just want to make sure that you're aware of the impacts. One of them is, we will have to cut into the programs. There is no way around it. The programs that we will be probably proposing to cut into will be the future TLC money, as well as the pit bike programs, probably stuff that are not being used for operations like bus services or your local streets and roads maintenance. And that could be okay if we're willing to make these adjustments now. What I'm saying, the reason we recommended the baseline scenario is for the next 3 years, we are being conservative. Both the conservative and the baseline are the same for the next 3 years. Can you show the chart? Through fiscal year 21. And between now and then, we will be looking at this very closely. And we could come every year, as you mentioned, to report on significant changes from our revenues. It's just a choice by the board. Do you want to make those painful cuts? I mean, as Randy mentioned, basically we'll be done with our projects. We will not have money to do any future projects if we adopt a conservative scenario. Not only that, we will have to cut into our programs to continue with our commitments on the existing projects. So just keep that in mind when you make a decision on this. We will be coming back every 2 years to update our revenue projections. And between now and then, we want to make sure we are not taking your ability to react. So we will probably not be programming much money to projects between now and 2025. We will just be focusing on our existing commitments.
Randy wants to add on to that.
Mr. Young, would you like to talk? You're from HDL. Would you like to say anything about how you came up with the projections? And I mean, because this is really important for us. I mean, I think if the conservative approach is the way to go out in the future, and we all know that, then let's do it now. Because as my fear is, as you lose time, you can't make time up, and then the cuts become even worse for some future. For you, the board in the future, it's going to be worse. So if the conservative is the way we go, let's go that way now versus wait a year or 2 years or 3 years, because the cuts are going to get even worse if that's the direction that the economy is headed.
And yet the opportunity cost that you have of going that approach, if that's not how things work.
That's right.
Through the chair, before you say something, sir, and I'm going to respect everything you do say, is that also you have to realize this board is a political board. And
Really?
yes, and obviously, we generally try to catch. How do you catch a falling knife? That's kind of the question to ask, and this organization has always been pretty dang astute of actually not letting the knife really fall. So hopefully you understood what I just said. I know what I said,
Absolutely.
but
Yes, by way of introduction, Bobby Young, HDL. For the past 35 years, HDL has been in the business of sales tax auditing services and also data reporting and forecasting. And our team, a team of about 10 principals, myself included, I've been with HDL for about 5 years. I'm a former finance director for the city of Costa Mesa down in Orange County. I have a total of about 25 years in governmental accounting experience, sat in the seat, such like Brian, also your auditor here earlier. I used to audit governmental agencies. So now looking at sales tax, I believe this is the first time the authority has engaged HDL or specifically a sales tax consultant to do the revenue forecast. Much like you saw with the data or the attachments to the report, is we dig through kind of the major categories that make up the revenue. So we're getting down kind of to the granular level. We also provide the service to a total of 11 agencies within the county. Total, including the county, of the 20, we have about 11 agencies that we do work for. As I've taken note, I believe it's just Brentwood that is currently a client of ours, but we also represent a total of about 400 agencies statewide, where we do all of the same tax services. Coming to your forecast and listening to the commissioner talk about more conservative approach, being a former finance director myself, working for local government, our normal approach is to be a little bit more conservative. Providing you with 3 scenarios was not a problem to do, but intrinsically, the majority of our team are ex-government employees, and we feel, Commissioner Taylor, to your point there, I can't help but apply the political aspects of a long-term forecast and the implications that it means to on an operational basis. So while I did the forecast and crunched the numbers, I couldn't help but put myself in staff's shoes to say, how do we present this and what does it look like? Mostly to the Commissioner Newell's, your comments about the economy overall and what we see, a lot of that is in here. It's built in. As Hisham has mentioned, we took a lot of that into consideration. We feel like we're at a growth period, reaching the top. The question that keeps coming back up for us through the data is how much more are we going to grow? And so we really feel like we're seeing a slowdown coming. So building that into the forecast is being more conservative. When we do look to the out years, as Hisham pointed out, you can't help but say, yeah, there's going to be periods in the future where we're going to grow exponentially. But to that point, we only have 15 years left on the tax itself, and we're trying to hit a nail on the head is really the phrase that we use rather than catching a falling sword. We're trying to hit the nail on the head for at the end run, nobody's left with a bag. Everything that you've collected, you've spent, and unless the voters extend the tax, you're in a good place to accomplish goals. I would say, as Director had mentioned, making those decisions, and I believe as Hisham has mentioned too, making those decisions right now to use our conservative approach might be a bit extreme, might not be ready for that. We have the ability to provide services on a quarterly basis to analyze your sales tax data, provide you updates. Also on an annual basis, come back and relook at this. I think we're in a very crucial period of the economy where we feel like change is happening. If anybody has been watching the stock market today, it's like, oof. But it's right now is when we should be looking at this more consistently on an ongoing basis to really evaluate, because we want to try to be, if not ahead of the curve, which hopefully these next couple of years within your forecast, even on the baseline perspective, includes, is try to be right at the curve. My local agency, during the Great Recession, we couldn't see it coming, and it hit way harder than we were expecting at that time. While we tried to anticipate, we just couldn't. So we'd like to kind of be right on that cutting edge, which I think I'm thankful that Brian and the authority have engaged us, because we've got the data to support that, to see the trends, to look regionally for the county-wide that the tax measure includes. So I think it's very prudent from a commission, but also from a board level, back to a staff level to start evaluating what, if things go bad, how would you respond? And get some of those questions answered right now while not making those decisions, be ready to respond if something happens. So hopefully that adds to the conversation.
That's great. If I could comment, that is perfect. What I hear, just to summarize in a simple way, is since this really is only a 3-year plan, the next 3 years are conservative estimates, and your chart shows that. So baseline and conservative are exactly the same for that. That maybe makes prudent sense, because we're already doing that. Randy's point is that beyond the 3 years, if you make that assumption now, that conservative approach, it could forestall us from doing things in the future and not take those opportunities should it stay on the baseline. So I think that is good. I would add that, because it was a staff suggestion, then maybe, or it was a staff option, that maybe we should then on the program side go with the staff recommendation on the baseline, but recommend we look at a contingency to start building a contingency for our programs. And then that doesn't prevent us from the long-term opportunities that we could lose if we do the conservative now. I think that would be a reasonable way to balance, to protect.
What does that contingency fund look like? I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and I see a question.
Yeah, just like we have
on
contingency in
Randy's face,
construction, we'd come up with a methodology. I'm not sure we've had a discussion about it.
Yeah, it's a great idea, Commissioner. I think a contingency basically means if a program has 5% of our annual sales tax revenue, maybe we program only 4% and keep 1% on the side for just the next 3 years to see where the economy goes before we release it. That could be an option.
One of the recommendations that we're going to have for some of the areas that don't have capital projects, they're all completed. West County is the example. So the recommendation would be is don't allocate any TLC money. That's a program, but it's capital funds for 5 years. We're not going out for a call for projects
For 5 years.
For 5 years. So we're going to hold those dollars in advance as a contingency. We're going out anyway. But don't count on those dollars in the future. And then if it ends up being a conservative, these things are built in as protection so that if it dips down like that and that comes true, then you have flexibility. You don't have flexibility in West County on the capital program because your projects are built, but they were built for a lot less than they would cost tomorrow. And so we're trying to figure out ways of making sure that we don't stop some of the great initiatives we have, but make sure that we have enough contingency available, float, if you will, so that when that line does go like that, you have the flexibility in the future to just say, you know what, we're not going to go out for another TLC for CCTA for the entire county, whatever those contingencies are.
Tom.
Building a contingency has the same effect as a conservative projection, because if you build a contingency, you're taking money away from projects that ordinarily would be there and planning on a conservative trend, you know, if your actuals tend to be better than your predictions, then you've got to, you know, what the difference is a contingency that you now can spend. So I don't see that building a contingency is going to be any different than doing a conservative trend.
Except that the opportunity costs are not as high, perhaps.
Well, yeah, but if you're building a contingency, you're not spending it. So what's the difference between that and?
It's projections, Tom. What I think was what Randy was saying is that you still assume that baseline revenue, which is greater than a conservative, while the net effect maybe specifically on a specific program does that. It doesn't prevent us from forward planning and being ready to do these other projects should the revenue be what we need. Randy's saying if we take the lower one, then you can't plan for those, and you'll never get to.
I think Randy wants to jump in there.
I was going to say, Hisham has a detailed strategy of how to deal with this without stopping the progress that we've made by not allocating dollars in certain programs that we weren't going to allocate dollars for past the 3-year time frame. And so we'll revisit this. I think our contract is we have how many more sessions or whatever you call it?
How many forecasts?
Yeah, how many?
Two under this contract.
Yeah, so we have 2 more. So we're trying to make sure that we give you a forward view so that you're informed about where we are in this, because this is really a critical time, I think, for the authority and our ability to deliver those projects and programs that we've committed to, and we're trying to do everything we can to do that.
So what I'm hearing here is that that notwithstanding previous comments, the recommendation of the committee is going to be to adopt the staff recommendation with the proviso that we consider building up some kind of a contingency fund to buffer any unexpected events and to reevaluate on a regular basis. Is that a fair characterization of the recommendation?
Tom doesn't seem to think so.
Well, I'm going to be the cynic, you know. I've been in business. I started my business in 1973, which was a recession year, and we had a recession in 73, 82, I can't remember, 91, 92, 2001, you know, and then again, you know, starting in 2008 and going for 5 years. And it's like, look, guys, this is going to happen. I mean, it's just, there's no evidence that somehow a pattern that has been established now for a half a century is all of a sudden going to change and everything's going to be wonderful. I just think it's prudent to be more conservative. And I remember all those because, you know, we darn near went out of business, each one of those, you know, and then we were able to recover. But I think the time is now to predict that there's going to be a recession starting in the next, next year or 2 or 3, and make that, you know, build around that assumption. And if it doesn't happen, then, we can reprogram. But there's nothing indicating that that's not going to happen. It's always happened, you know. So.
Thank you, Tom. Newell?
I would say we've got 5 action items on here. The first one is we're sort of focusing on, and given that this is only a 3-year projection, then we are taking the conservative, which is what our consultant has confirmed. We're using the conservative projection.
That chart actually is quite valuable for reference purposes.
So I'm comfortable with that because I want to do the conservative. And this is a 3-year plan. So I think we can start to plan, though, in some reasonable way. And it doesn't take away from, it doesn't have the net same effect. It's actually a very different effect. By planning for a contingency, it just allows us smoothing the future, but it doesn't force all those programs to take a nosedive now, because you can do it slowly over time. The second one was.
Can we let's do these one at a time. I think we can do the rest.
Okay.
as a group, but let's wrap up this first item.
Okay. So
So what do you think,
I need you to come back on a quarterly basis. I don't want this stretched over, I'll see you in 6 months, I'll see you in 9 months, I'll see you in a year, because this has gone into great depth. And I know it's probably a pain in the rear for you, but I think we need to see the numbers. I don't know if the board agrees with me on that.
do we get this kind of data on a quarterly basis? My recollection is this sort of happens semi-annually more than quarterly, but.
Does it happen quarterly? Can you make it happen quarterly?
Historically, we have always presented to you a quarterly update on our sales tax analysis. Recently, in May of 2018, and maybe some of your cities as well, I actually download all of the data that we get, and I put it into an Access database, and then I present to you. But when they changed from the SBOE for the California Department Tax Administration, what they did is they changed the way that they publish the information. And now we have to go back and recreate a new database and everything like that. And I've been in talks with HDL since I've been here at the authority about providing sales tax information. And when the opportunity came for us to present sales tax information to you guys today, I was all on board with HDL due to historical and their knowledge throughout California. We've been in talks for several months about this presentation, and we've also been in talks recently, as far back as a couple months, about starting them to do our sales tax analysis. Because what they do, as Bobby, Mr. Taylor, you may know, is they go out and they look at all the sales tax within your agency. Then they come back and say, oh, some of it was misreported. Home Depot reported in Antioch instead of Brentwood. And they go out and they recollect and redistribute, and there's always a win factor for the agency. And as important as sales tax is to us and to each one of your regions and to all of the taxpayers in Contra Costa, I think that's the most prudent thing to do, and we'll be back to give you updates, and we will engage with HDL to ensure that we're giving you the most up-to-date and current information.
Is that quarterly or semi-annually? Or
Quarterly.
Okay.
As a part of our services, we provide the agency, all of our clients, with a quarterly newsletter, which is kind of a quick write-up of what happened within your jurisdiction, but then also statewide trends and a little bit more information. And most recently, it's been a lot of talk about the Wayfair case, but we provide that every quarter. So that would also come along with our quarterly services, so that you as
good. I'm not just going to get a newsletter. I really don't. I need real stuff.
We are happy to provide the level of service that.
Okay, then I'm for whatever motion comes out of this. I'm not quite sure how to read, but I'm satisfied with the 3 years. I'm satisfied with having the statements so we can make sure we're not.
So if
I don't want to go down. I know the Titanic went down, but I want to be I want to have a life vest.
Thank you. Yes, for everybody. Yeah, that's right. He wants his own lifeboat. Forget about the rest of us. So if I were to try to crystallize all this, I would say that that perhaps the recommendation of this committee might be to adopt the staff recommendation. With regard to the HDL baseline revenue forecast, with a couple of things. One, that we'll receive a quarterly report with detailed backup and numbers from HDL so that we can understand whether we're making that trend line or not. And that we, I guess, agendize for a future discussion, whether we need to do anything to establish any kind of a fund, a contingency fund, other than what Director Iwasaki said about the STIP money. Is that fair? Okay.
I'm okay.
Thank you. And then maybe we can quickly go over the rest of them, because I have to tell you, I didn't, personally reading the other recommendations, they all, again, to invoke George H.W. Bush, I think these are very prudent, a very prudent set of assumptions.
Yeah, there's one. I was going to say two. I think we already commented on. That's basically leaves the flexibility of the RTPCs to make their own flexibility in how to make any cuts that they have to do, which is how we've done. On consideration 3, I didn't really hear from staff what the reasoning was. We're talking about doing a 3-year plan here. But this talks about extending it out to 2020, 24, 25. Is that what we're saying, is that we're not going to come back and revisit this plan?
No, no. This means your
projections.
2019 strategic plan window, the horizon they're looking at is through 2025. But between now and then, every 2 years, you're going back,
Okay.
updating it, and adding 2 more years to the horizon.
Okay, that's fine for my sake.
Okay, and then we had considerations 4 and about capitalizing programs to maintain sub-regional equity, which seems to be hitting West County perhaps, or East County the most. Again, I don't have any, if that's what is necessary to maintain sub-regional equity, then that principle of sub-regional equity is like, the constitution of the
Yes.
CCTA.
Yes.
So I'm okay with that as well, and the construction reserve for Central County, of course, makes a ton of sense. So, do we want to make another motion then along those lines?
Yes, I would make the motion then that all the other items we've talked about, other than the projection baseline, that we adopt staff recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Through the chair, how did we do the first one?
We did vote on it.
Right now, with that caveat,
Yeah, just to make sure, to amend the motion that, yes, on the baseline projection, the coming back with the quarterly update from HDL, all of those things, yes, that was
That was
of the
part of your motion, too.
Yes.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I thought we had voted. I
Yeah.
apologize. All right. I think that's it on that item.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see what else we have here. We have correspondence and news clippings. Is there anything that anyone wants to raise? I don't see any item there. Then we have commissioner and staff comments, chair's comments. I do have a couple of comments. First of all, before we went on tape here, before we had a quorum present, I did announce that this will be my last meeting as a member of the Administration and Projects Committee. And this seat will be filled for the month of January by my colleague on the Moraga Town Council, Renata Sauce, who will also be representing the SWAT region on the CCTA board for the December and January meetings before we reorganize for the February meeting. And my understanding is that for the La Miranda area on the CCTA board, it will be whoever the new Don Tatson is. We don't know who that is yet. Betting is apparently Teresa Geringer is a likely choice there, but that's up to the Lafayette City Council. Renata was appointed to replace Jeanette Fritzke, who passed away earlier in the fall. Tragic loss to the town. Renata is a great person. She's an attorney, but she has spent the last many years working for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So she has a strong background in accounting. Was the president or the chairman of the, I forget which title was, of the California Board of Accountancy. So I mean, it's a pretty significant regulatory function. She knows a lot, and I think she'll make a great interim member of this committee. She'll put me to shame at least. I also just want to say it's been a real pleasure serving on the CCTA board for the past almost 2 years. I didn't quite get my entire term in, unfortunately. I've really enjoyed getting to know some of you. Tom, we hadn't previously done much at all together. Really enjoyed working with you. Bob, you and I, and Newell and I go back a little bit farther than that. This is a great committee. I wish Julie were here today as well. She would have done a better job of keeping us in line today. I also want to have a shout out to the CCTA as an organization, Randy, and of course all the staff here. I've been really impressed by how well managed and how smoothly the authority operates. It's a well-oiled machine. I have to say that the worst thing that I've ever encountered here in 2 years happened this morning when the cream was curdled and my coffee, I had to dump my cup of coffee and start over. If that's the worst thing I can say in almost 2 years, I'd say you guys are doing a great job. So keep up the good work. You do important work. You do a great job of advocating for regional equity and making sure that Contra Costa comes out ahead, if not even a little bit more ahead, in terms of making sure that we try to manage our transportation problems here on a countywide basis. So it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed getting to know all of you, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Dave, can we add a comment to say thank you? You came on board first time in transportation, and you helped get us through a very difficult transition, and you jumped right in to lead us up on our Gomentum station and our AAA partnership. You did it with elegance. You did it with the great authority that you bring of your legal background, but the perspective of how government should run. And it's really been a pleasure. We're going to miss you a lot.
Thank you, Noel. And you sent me an email, and you referred to our intellectual dissuasions, and I responded to that. And I said, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm just curious that we don't have that conversation right now, but you can tell me, is it really that you liked the fact that I was trying to make you change your mind?
I like the fact that you challenged everybody on a basis of reasoning and facts, and which is always a good way to have a discussion.
We do need a director's report. I'm sorry to waste your time. Okay? All right. So hang on. Are there any commissioner comments or reports? No. Direct executive staff comments.
Commissioners, normally I don't say anything at APC if I don't have to, but I'm just going to say thank you for your help, Commissioner Trotter. It's been a pleasure working with you. I think that goes for the team here. You ask very direct questions and you expect good answers or the right answers. You helped us through the issues with AAA, but also with our contracting, and you stepped right up. And I mean, you're asking very, very difficult questions that a lot of times we don't think about because we're so ingrained in the process, and so it's very, very helpful to us in our growth opportunities with our team. So we thank you for that. And I don't know, we're going to watch over your issue. The federal government owes you some dollars, and Lindsay and I have not forgotten that, and we're going to continue to pursue your dollars that you need and then help you in any way.
The bridge, the trail.
Yes.
The trail project, yeah, we appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And in terms of being, someone who asks questions, I either put it down to the fact that I ask good questions or I'm just by nature a wise ass, which is entirely possible. So anyway, thank you very much. We are up to other business. There is none, and so we'll stand in adjournment to our next meeting on January 3rd, 2019. Thank you all. Good meeting. At, what is that, 7 minutes? Is that 10:53?
What is your last Thursday, next Tuesday?
Next Wednesday. Yeah.
We'll see you tonight.
Yeah, yes, county's back.
Yeah, we're going to miss you. We'll see you too.
You're still on park, right? No, I'm off of that. That was a big conference. Really? I was Bob Simmons.